Mark Rogers TV on the live stream talking Florida State football. We bring in James Coleman from Gridiron Now. You can also catch him on his podcast, Sports Den Live. I'm just going to let you know to basically go to James' Twitter page, Big Games James 36, Big Game James 36, and you get the full rundown of everywhere you can find him. He writes, he talks, he's got some great insight into Florida State and college football. James, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing good, man. Just enjoying this nice weather. We're under 90 degrees. Sun's out. Like I said, it's probably going to be a lot of rain here soon, so I'm going to enjoy this while I got it.
Absolutely. Finally, some good weather up here in the Northeast. It feels like summer. Finally, I think we skipped spring and went straight from 40 to 80, but that's fine with me. I'm good with that. And it's been nice and sunny for the last week or so. All right. Always looking toward the college football season here at Mark Rogers TV. Please join the YouTube channel, but also the audio on Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. James, I want to talk about that vibe. I want you to set the stage for us in regards to how things feel around the program. Before we started to record here, you mentioned Willie Taggart's tour and just a level of excitement, anticipation that you haven't felt for a while.
Yeah, so one thing that we've done at Florida State is every year the head coach, he goes to the major booster clubs. A really good event for people who are outside to know like what's exactly going on. And everywhere has been sold out. So it's a golf tournament, and then he goes and he does different things where he talks with Gene Deckeroff, who's the voice of FSU, and he talks about what's going on. So, like, he started here in Jacksonville, Florida, where I live, and it was sold out, and he's going all over the place, and everybody is excited and anticipating a big season after 1 year just through the energy that he brings.
James, do you golf?
Very well. I look good, but I try to play golf pretty decent.
You play some decent golf.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when I say decent, I can't play by myself. I got to play in the foursome and best ball, and I'm going to hit 4 shots that can make you believe. But I'm also going to hit probably about 1,000 shots that are going to be average.
What is it about golf? Because I recognize, well, with guys generally, most guys get into golf. I never got into it. I keep hearing that if I would, then you get hooked, you get addicted. But for former athletes in particular, just looking at you guys, there's something about golf where I don't know if it's you can kind of look to your later life and think, okay, I can still do something that's somewhat competitive and somewhat athletic. But for you guys that run, jump, and do the real athletic stuff in another sport, golf seems to be an addiction for a lot of athletes.
Well, the thing about golf is it's not necessarily the sport per se. It's more about the locker room aspect. So you're spending 4 hours with another group of 3 to 8, depending on how you play it, guys, and all you're doing is just talking it up, chopping it up. You know, me and my guys will have cigars, and we may have a couple beverages while we're doing it, and we're just talking about everything from sports to marriages to kids, and you kind of get addicted to that. Meanwhile, when you hit like golf, when the swing when everything comes together, the noise that it makes is addictive, and you start playing for the 4 shots. Like, it's like you'll be sitting there like I'm gonna quit. But then you finally hit the shot that's like you feel like you've seen Tiger Woods make, and you're like, man, I can do this. And then you start getting some lessons, and then you realize, like, man, nah, I don't want to quit my day job.
Good stuff from James Coleman. Covers Florida State football for Gridiron Now. Also catch him on the Sports Den Live podcast as well. And you just released a before we get to that, actually, I want to go to the pressing news at hand concerning offensive tackle Josh Ball, that being more timely news. Let's hit that as well. Give us the latest there.
Yeah, what happened was he was, I think back in February or March, he was accused by an ex-girlfriend of domestic violence and stalking and things like that. So he was not charged or he didn't like, the courts didn't take that, but she was a student at Florida State. So the university council had to kind of come in and they have to rule on these things when a student brings this up. So there was enough evidence for the university to be able to step in and suspend him. And I believe he's been suspended indefinitely. Now, he was going to be a starting offensive lineman this year. So it was a big piece of what we had coming back. So now he kind of just made Coach Greg Fry's job a little bit harder because now you don't have a guy who's going to be able to step in and protect the backside of your quarterback, whether it be DeAndre Francois, who's coming off of an injury, or James Blackman, who's is a pencil thin.
All right, on the line with James Coleman from Gridiron Now. You can also catch him on his show, Sports Den Live, talking Florida State football, of course. And you just released an article focusing on the issues along the offensive line and specifically at center with Alec Eberle possibly holding the keys to the whole deal. We typically think of other positions, don't look at the center. Communication along the offensive line, chemistry, cohesiveness, extremely important. And usually that center is the guy making the line calls. So your thoughts in regards, I don't want to deter people from not checking out the article. So don't give us too much, but give us a glimpse into what you're talking about there.
Well, one of the big things is that everybody talks about who is the person that's going to be able to make this go. So obviously your quarterback. So people want to make the argument about FSU will win 10 to 11 games if DeAndre Francois or James Blackman start. Or they talk about Nooney Murray needs to be the main number one wide receiver, or Tamarin Terry, or even a young guy like Jordan Young or Trayshawn Harrison. They need to come in and be the big guys, or running back, obviously Cam Akers being a potential FSU great, or Jaquez Patrick. But few realize that if you have great line play, you can win a lot of games. And when we look at Josh Ball and we look at all these other players, nobody's more important than the center. The center sets up all the offensive blocking. So especially in the pass game with college becoming such an RPO system, you have to be able to point out who the main threat is on the blitz. And the center typically is the person who points that out. And they dictate the kind of pass protection that you're going to have. And Alec Eberle is a guy who battled injury in 2016 with hip flexors, came into 2017 and had a better year than what people give him credit for, but he still struggled. But when you look at what FSU played against, they went up against some of the best defensive lines in college football. And sometimes he was a little bit of a turnstile. But in order for FSU to take that next step, the offensive line has to play better. And the only way the offensive line will play better is if the redshirt senior, Alec Eberle, takes a huge step forward in Greg Fry's system.
Good stuff from James Coleman, setting us up for Florida State football, and that's been probably the weakest link on the team over the last few years. Even the teams that were winning Orange Bowls, in particular in 2016, the offensive line and DeAndre Francois, that particular year making a lot of plays despite having to get up after a dusting the previous play and making some big plays, getting hit in the mouth a number of times and showing us something as a freshman. And that's why a lot was expected, of course, last year in the Alabama matchup in week 1, and expecting Florida State to make a big mark because of what we saw out of Francois last season, and Florida State football looking good. But, of course, it all came a bit unraveled and finishing at 7-6. But as we look ahead, the recruiting's been strong, not necessarily a whole lot going on in regards to expected commits on the horizon, but looking back at what's been brought in here thus far for 2019, a real solid class.
Yeah, right now it's looking real good. Akeem Dent is headlined right now, but we are going to safety from down south in the Miami area. We're going to have to fight all the way to the end on that one. So FSU fans, don't rest on your laurels on that one. Alabama is really trying to get him. He's the number 1 DB in the nation. We lost out on Sean Dollars, who an amazing running back from out of the California area. They committed to Oregon. But even with all that saying, like, people want to talk about misses and Willie, and because Willie is supposed to be recruiting Dynamo, we're still top 5 when it comes to recruiting rankings. It's still in great position for a lot of guys. Dean coming out of the Mississippi area, top linebacker of the nation. You've got Trey Sanders, who's from the Florida area originally, from Port St. Joe, plays at IMG. So we got a lot of guys that we're still trying to push. Luckily, FSU has a ton of depth at the skill positions, and really where we got to make big gains is across the offensive line. You still need to get a big time running back, and really the quarterback position is where it's at. We're really good right now as far with Sam Howell, but we got to sign another. Quarterback. 2 quarterbacks in this class.
Over the last few weeks, I've looked at schedules both for 2018 and some of the future schedules of the contracts that have been signed by the major powers across college football. Cut a video on each Power 5 conference and what the future schedules look like. So first, James, we'll dive into 2018, and Florida State's in a situation that only a few other programs are in, and most of those within the ACC because of that Notre Dame rotation. So if Notre Dame comes up as a game for anybody particular in the ACC, then they already have a rivalry set up. If you're talking Georgia Tech, Florida State, Louisville, and Clemson, already going to play one of the SEC Eastern Division teams. So you're already playing 2 tough teams out of the gate. So that's what happens to Florida State a number of times. So this is what's turning out to be by most standards, and I'm going to rate the Power 5 conferences or the schedules as I typically do, 68 all the way up to number 1 later this summer. But right now, talking Miami and Virginia Tech being the 2 games out of the other division, so most likely the 2 best teams out of the Coastal Division, and then with Notre Dame and Florida, who Florida was down last year but should bounce back and be a pretty good team this year. That's a pretty difficult go for the Noles this year.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult schedule. Not we can still have a lot of success when it comes. People got to understand the tradition in which FSU has. We used to be considered the road warriors. We'll play anybody, anywhere, any given time. That's how Bobby Bowden made his name in college football. So, we've gone up to Notre Dame many a times and been victorious. And Notre Dame has some very good talent on their roster, and that should be a good game. But we'll know everything we need to know out of this Florida State team after they play Virginia Tech, win, lose, or draw. Like, you'll see the competitive nature and how they're going to do it. Virginia Tech is coming in their second year with a new coach, but very well-coached team, very defensive, and they run a variation of the spread as well, so the up-tempo type of offense. I expect a lot of points to be scored on left. Florida, it's not a real rivalry if they haven't won. So, they have the real record in the last 5 years, last 30 years. If you've been alive, you really can't expect Florida to be much of a competition. That's me talking trash, though. But Florida should be much better with Coach Dan Mullen. The games that really circle, if you're an FSU fan or an FSU hater, is the FSU-Miami game down in Miami. Miami is bringing back a team with a ton of talent and a ton of confidence coming off of last season. So I'm going to be at that game in Miami, and I'm really excited as a fan of college football because when I was growing up, FSU and Miami were the games that I really loved to be a part. And even as a player, I just cherished playing in that game. So that should be good. And then Clemson, we've been a thorn in Clemson's been a better program than ours the last 3 to 4 years. We've played Clemson very tough. I believe FSU should be able to can knock this Clemson team off, but I also believe this is the best Clemson team they've had. Like, they're really good.
You think that the Clemson team that we're going to see this fall is better than the Deshaun Watson teams?
Yes, they've got 4 defensive linemen with first round
sure.
grades.
Yep.
That in of itself is crazy. But they've got talent at running back in the wide receiver position, talent at DB, and their quarterback, though he is not Deshaun Watson, is not far off. But they have a kid, I think Trevor Lawrence is his name, the recruit,
yep.
who I'm hearing might be better than the quarterback they have right now. So who knows?
Yeah, so they had a five-star in Hunter Johnson who's decided to kind of give up on the battle at Clemson and move on and take his services elsewhere. And he'll probably show up as a very talented kid to be able to compete for another job. But it's between, yeah, Trevor Lawrence, the big five-star, and of course, we saw Kelly Bryant last year. And I think Kelly Bryant taking a little bit too much of a hit based on the Alabama performance in which he was just overwhelmed. But that was offensive line play, that was issues on the running game, not being able to power anything, having a couple scat back types, and not having a real power running game. And Kelly Bryant a bit overwhelmed in that game, but it wasn't certainly all him, and only scoring 6 points in that game against Alabama.
Well, also Alabama, man, that defense was. Again, I learned my first article that I wrote on the media side was Alabama don't take this butt whooping personally, and I got humbled very fast. Like I am now, I will never disrespect Alabama again. Like I learned my lesson.
Yeah, it's going to take a few examples of some teams turning the tables on Bama for me to give up on them as well. No doubt about that. Got James Coleman on the line from Gridiron Now, covering Florida State football. Got to join him on his podcast as well, Sports Den Live. And when James refers to Road Warriors being the original Road Warriors, he's referring to Bobby Bowden took over a program that was not Florida State, what we've seen in the last 40 years. He took over a fledgling program. He built it. They started to reach Orange Bowls around 1979, 1980, in which they were out of nowhere. People were expecting to typically see Nebraska and Oklahoma and Ohio State and the rest of them in bowl games. And suddenly Florida State shows up on the scene. And for a number of years, they had to go to Nebraska. They had to go to Notre Dame. They had to go to Ohio State. They went to Ohio State back-to-back years in 81 and 82. And those schools wouldn't go down to Florida State. So they had to be a name brand after a number of years to start to get those return trips from some of the other powers in college football. But Bobby Bowden knew that he had the talent, even though it was under the radar, and knew that that was going to be his way of putting his program on the map to be able to knock down the big boys.
Yeah, just no fear. And now then it was crazy, right? But now everybody comes to the state of Florida to recruit. We've got the last 4 or 5 years, based on the Rivals Index, 1 out of every 10 eligible athletes in the state of Florida goes on to play FBS football. So everybody comes to the state to recruit this talent. So just imagine all that talent just staying between the big three. So FSU had no problem going there. And then just as a Florida guy, it's an arrogance, but you just don't believe they play football the way we play football everywhere else. We're faster, might not be bigger or stronger, but you can't hit what you can't catch. So we play a different brand of football down this way. And Bobby took that mentality, and it got reinvented with Jimbo, and now with Willie Taggart. I hope you have a new resurgence with this run pass option, or spread is the easy way to say it, but essentially it's a run pass option that he has been successful with at South Florida on a smaller level, relative success at Oregon, and hopefully with the right pieces, he'll be successful with at Florida State.
So everything James talks about right there can be backed up with numbers. Texas and California are right there as well. But when it comes to just droves of athletes in Texas and California, especially California, you got to take into consideration has a much higher population. Florida's well populated, but California is the most populated state in America. So when they churn out roughly the same numbers, it's not per capita by any stretch close to Florida. Do you have any theories as to why the water's special down there?
Well, it's a couple things. It's that everybody wants to come to the state of Florida, whether it's the different ethnicities, different cultures, and different sports, and the best retire here. So I looked out, like today I have a training business, and I was training 5 former Jaguar players, and these guys are going around and they're teaching their kids how to play the game the same way that they played it. You don't really have that everywhere else. People retire to move to Florida, and it's the sales tax and a lot of those things, but mixed in with some It's one, like it makes you're you like it was either you went D1 or there's other areas. So I think that's the main secret to the state of Florida as far as the dominance, the ability to play year round and just the competitive nature.
Yeah, so again, people don't get offended if you live in another part of the country. For example, I'm from Ohio. We take great pride in our high school football, but there's no debate that there's no comparison between not the level of athlete. If you take the number one player in Ohio and the number one player in Florida, they're going to be very comparable. But if you take the 100th player in Florida and the 100th player in Ohio, they're not going to be comparable. So don't get offended. That's all backed up by statistics and the performance on the field. There are other great states for high school football performance, and the two that come to mind, again, based on just the numbers, are Texas and California. Saw a stat this year, James, that out of the top 400 players in the recruiting rankings for this year, 40% come from Florida, California, and Texas. 40% come from those three states. And yeah, you've got other great states: South Carolina, Georgia, I was going to say LSU, Louisiana, and again, Ohio, Pennsylvania. But in terms of per capita, Florida, it's crazy how many athletes, premium athletes, that the state churns out. James, I'm probably going to ask you that question some other time because we caught most of your answer, but not all of it. And I would love at a future date to hear the complete spiel. So you're starting to break up on us, and I want to hit you with two questions. And this is off the chat. And I'm not going to hold you to the answers because we both know that making predictions in May is foolish, but it's
Right.
just to serve the folks on the chat, because you can almost guess what the two most prominent questions are. Number one, how many games are you going to win? Number two, who's going to be the quarterback?
Oh man. My one, I'm going to say FSU will win 10 games.
And again, if you come on here and it's a week before the season and you say, "Hey, I'm thinking more like 9-3," I'm not holding you to it, but people are asking for it.
Yeah. I say 10 games. I'm I believe we have a chance to beat Clemson. I don't think we beat Clemson though, if I'm being honest. Um, like I said, this might be the best Clemson team they've ever had. And then we'll lose probably some game. We'll drop a game here or there. No, I'm just not going to give Willie, a first year coach, undefeated. I just don't believe I don't believe it's possible. But as far as who the starting quarterback will be, if healthy, I believe it'll probably be DeAndre Francois. I just believe Willie believes in DeAndre a lot, in his skill set, and he's fallen in love with him. Who I personally believe is the best quarterback for FSU is James Blackman, though.
Why?
I think James Blackman's command presence, the way he's thrown the ball, having another spring under his belt, I believe the sky is the limit for him. He's got the size, he's got the cannon arm, and this type of offense to be able to make teams have to respect the downfield, and he's an adequate runner. The the reason why FSU went 7-6 under Blackman has very little to do with Blackman not being ready, and everything to do with this is a kid who did not early enroll. This is a kid who came in the summer and had taken 0 snaps as a number one quarterback up until the week of the North Carolina State game. And I just think too much was placed on him. And you add to the fact that Jimbo was should I stay, should I go all of last season.
So, James, this is why we have you on. This is great clarification here, because the treetop viewpoint says we saw DeAndre Francois the year before.
Right.
And we know that the offensive line wasn't great, and he got knocked around, and as a freshman was able to play as well as he did, especially in the clutch. And so they won the Orange Bowl. They finished in the top 10 in the nation. Then we go to James Blackman. All we know about Florida State football, especially for a guy like me and a lot of people that are out there watching, trying to watch the best games, and Florida State kind of went off the map. So we didn't see them, and we just see 7-6.
Yeah. So let's put in perspective. DeAndre Francois
had arguably the greatest quarterback to ever play at Florida State in Dalvin Cook. And Dalvin Cook was just Dalvin was that good.
Oh, yeah,
Now,
that guy.
Cam Akers is good, but Cam Akers was a true freshman as well. And Cam Akers was not Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook was a guy who can transform a game, whether it be through the running game or whether it be through the passing game. Either way, he could take it over. So that's what DeAndre Francois had. He had a guy that every defense had to respect. This past season, it was a little bit different. So, I mean, those are the things I want people to take. It's no knock on DeAndre Francois. It's just a little bit of perspective when you're looking at, yes, BCS Bowl versus BS Bowl.
So this is beautiful. So this is beautiful, James, because that's what we try to cut to here on Mark Rogers TV is the truth and a little deeper analysis, and not just DeAndre achieved this, Blackman didn't. And you know how quarterbacks get tied to wins and Super Bowls like they're the only guy in the field. And it's just one of the things that drives me completely crazy is that Tom Brady won 5 Super Bowls. Well, the New England Patriots won 5 Super Bowls, and Tom Brady is great, but he needed all sorts of help. There's guys out there hitting and tackling and blocking and catching passes. And at the same time, he didn't necessarily lose the 3 Super Bowls. He was part of it.
Right.
Yeah, it drives me crazy. All right, James, always appreciate the time. It's James Coleman. You join him, Big Game James 36 on Twitter. You can see everything he's involved in there, but most notably, it's a Sports Den Live, his podcast, and also Gridiron Now with some great insight into Florida State and college football. James, you have a great weekend. Stay dry, and we'll catch up with you soon.
All right, man. Sounds good. Appreciate you.